So, welcome back to episode 2 of What a Future. We are joined today by Shona Hirons. Shona is quite fantastic. She is the escaped lawyer. That's how she describes herself. She's a lawyer for 20 years, working at that time 80 hours a week before having a life-changing accident that caused her to really rethink her life and look at things with a new perspective. Since that time, she's become an expert and consultant on burnout in the workplace. She's an award-winning inspirational speaker and a best-selling author. Shona, I'm so grateful to have you here today. Thanks a lot for coming.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me, Fraser.
Brilliant. No, it's great to speak again. We spoke, didn't we, a little while ago? So it's brilliant to catch up and see how things are going. I mean, life-changing accident, Christ, that's got to change everything, hasn't it?
It absolutely. But do you know what? It shouldn't get to that point. And I think this is why I am so passionate now about well-being in the workplace, burnout in particular. Because I was working at a pace which was just beyond ridiculous for about 6 years. And I knew there were things that weren't quite right with me. I started off having panic attacks quite regularly. And honestly, the first time I had a panic attack, I thought I was dying. I had no idea what was happening to me. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't talk to anyone about it, and the main reason for that was because I've got an aunt, and she's always had panic attacks from childhood, and I always remember my mum saying, "Oh, she's ruined this family event because she's had one of her stupid panic attacks again. She just needs to get over it." So I kind of thought that was going to be everybody's attitude towards, even if that was what I was having. I didn't know, and I would just crack on and just try and put a brave, almost like a mask over it. And people would always say, "Oh, you look really well." And I might have looked all right on the surface, but inside I was dying. I everything was work. And the harder I seemed to work, the more, I'd say, the slower I became, because I was just not able to function. I'd come into work some mornings and I'd have a document in front of me, and I could read the same line 50 times and I wouldn't be able to tell you what it said. And now in hindsight, I can recognize those, there's around 10 phases of burnout. And they all kind of go up in escalation. Never say that word. But nobody ever warned me about any of this. I had blood tests done in hospital. I had brain scans done. I even had some tests called nerve conduction tests, because I'd lose the feeling in my hands quite often and my feet. And the results would always come back and say, "Oh, Mrs. Hirons, we've got good news. There's nothing wrong with you." But without trying to sound like a hypochondriac, that didn't feel like good news, because I knew my body and I knew that there was something not right with me. I'd always been into my fitness and had lots of energy, and I just had none. I could barely function. So, when this did lead to me having a life-changing accident, which will be 6 years next week, I'd been working at this kind of level on at least 80-hour weeks on many occasions with children at home. And I think part of it was down to me not having healthy boundaries and being able to say no and being that people pleaser. But now in hindsight, I realise that, I wish I'd had more balance in my life. And why wasn't there anyone there to encourage me to do that? And I don't want anyone else to go through that.
No, that's brilliant. It's great to see the work that you're doing. I follow you regularly on LinkedIn, and your posts are brilliant. We were talking again. Your post earlier. We're going to give away the day that we recorded this on, but there's a post about what were they? Movement snacks.
Movement snacks. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, right, when you take a break away from your desk, or even if you just go and make a cup of tea or coffee, the amount of people that say, "I don't have time for a break," and I'll say, "Well, how many times do you go and make yourself a cuppa during the day?" And they might say, 5 or 6. So in that 3 minutes that it takes you to go and boil the kettle or brew the coffee, whatever it is you're going to do, just move. Put a song on in the background, something that makes you want to get up and dance and move about. And I am also a trained personal trainer, I show people how to do 3-minute total body workouts without any equipment. And you can just set your timer for 3 minutes, or for as long as it takes to make the coffee. And you can do as many reps as you can. So you might maybe do 12 wall presses, 12 squats and 12 crunches, and then you come back up and repeat it. Believe me, at the end of that 3 minutes, your heart rate will be up, you'll have more energy, you'll have moved, you've burnt calories, and all this releases all this serotonin and, the happy hormones in the brain. And you can come back to your desk after even just those few minutes, and you will feel so much more focused and be able to concentrate. And Microsoft recently did a study on this, or back at the end of 2021, where it did a study of, I can't remember how many people were in it, but they looked at people who were on back-to-back video calls over like 4 hours without taking breaks, compared to ones who just took literally 5-minute breaks between each one. And they did brain scans on each one of them. And the people who didn't take any breaks at all had these dark patches in their brain, which showed more stress. And then the knock-on effects of that were they were actually slower and performed worse during the rest of the day. It affected their moods. They would also take their moods home with them at the end of the day in a lot of situations. Some people admitted to hitting, alcohol to deal with that stress, and then not sleeping properly. And this would have a knock-on effect on the next day. Compared to the people who did just take those movement snacks, as I like to call them, and their brain scans showed that they had these lighter patches and they weren't stressed. And even though they'd taken these short breaks, they were able to focus more for the rest of the day. They performed a lot better. Their output was a lot better, and they were sleeping better. So the evidence speaks for itself.
Absolutely, and I think it's lovely to put it in fun terms. Movement snacks sounds great, sounds fun, but at the same time, it's so simple just to add that into your day. It doesn't really take a lot of sort of major change to go and get up for 5 minutes. So I think it's really good. But moving on to
sorry, I was going to say just schedule it if you need to into your calendar, because people forget. And, even if it's just 5 minutes here, and then what it will do is it might pop up, on your screen or whatever equipment you're using, and say, go and do a movement snack. And that will actually encourage you. It's a little bit of encouragement just to get moving.
Absolutely. Sometimes a reminder, right? Because you can get just totally lost in what you're doing. And my little trick is to miss a Zoom meeting. It's just to remember 5 minutes after it's supposed to end. No, that's bad. Anyway, moving on before I divulge all the secrets of my life. We're here. What a future! What we're trying to do here is really look at the issues that are affecting work. Work hasn't really changed a lot, the way that we look at work in sort of near on 200 years. We still have kind of management structures. We still have strict rules and boundaries and all of those things that in certain circumstances work very, very well. But actually the rest of the world has changed a lot. It's moved on. We have new technologies all the way from telephones in 100 years ago all the way through to the telephone being in your pocket, and the amount of power and search and knowledge that you can gather from it. So with all of that change going on, the first question to pose is, what is the biggest problem affecting the world of work right now, at this moment?
I'd say it's a couple. The first one might seem obvious, but I think the cost of living crisis is putting a financial strain on everyone. Nobody is exempt from it. Maybe a few of the elite percentage of people in the world may be exempt, but on the larger scale, there's a lot of the bigger companies out there are having mass layoffs. There's I think Microsoft actually have recently laid off a lot of people. I've worked with quite a few big companies as their resilience coach and people development expert, and even they're feeling the pinch everywhere. And it's affecting employees at home as well. How are they going to pay the bills with everything going up? Are they thinking, do they need to find a higher paid job? Is their mortgage going to go up? It's affecting so many people. And I'd say that out of all of the conversations I have, and I have a lot of conversations with people, this is probably the single biggest thing that is really affecting people's, definitely their mental well-being. And then,
so what is that? That's the sort of anxiety then of this feeling. Is it going to be me next? How am I going to afford this next thing? It's distracting you, right, from the things that from at least from a work perspective, sort of considered important in your day-to-day job. It's distracting because it's so all-consuming when you have those sort of financial worries.
It is. And if you look at the World Health Organization's definition of burnout, it's all work-related. It's all to do with, overwork. And I would actually say we've moved on, and that maybe that definition needs to be changed slightly, because I think there are other things that can add to the cause of burnout other than just your job. But there are things that employers can do to help make things a little bit easier for employees, like just asking them what they want. We're seeing strikes in so many different industries now as well because of pay and conditions. But again, when I ask people, has anyone ever asked you what you want as an employee? Most of the time they'll say no. And most people just want to feel valued, respected, have more autonomy over their day rather than just being under the 9-to-5 grind, for example. And maybe even have the option of hybrid or remote working, so they haven't got to worry about filling up their vehicle with fuel or electric. It's very tough for a lot of people right now. And then that affects sleep. Because if you're worried and overwhelmed about stuff and not knowing how to manage it or deal with it, then you're not sleeping very well. And this carries on having that domino effect.
Yeah, so it's crazy. I mean, I generally, I'm very lucky. I sleep pretty well, and every now and again, I just have a night where, it's just sleep's a bit of a disaster. It's amazing how heavy an effect that has. I just become totally useless for potentially days while I get this kind of problem sorted. And I think that's a really interesting one. I mean, is it fair to say that so we mentioned financial well-being, we've also mentioned sleep and the stress and flexibility around work. I mean, this is effectively what we're saying here is this sort of well-being crisis that's moving into the world of work and having a huge effect on people's output and productivity and all of those aspects. Is that fair to say? I
think so. I mean, I when we came out of the last pandemic, I said I think burnout is going to be the next pandemic, because what a lot of people didn't get quite right during the pandemic was obviously we were all of a sudden pushed into this digitally intense world where we're all now pretty much working remotely, and it might sound great to just get up an hour later and roll out of bed and start work. But by doing that, you're not owning your day. You're not flicking the switch between those four walls at home between work mode and home mode. And there were lots of things. There were things like loneliness that were coming out of this, and people generally working more hours. And there's been some recent data by Deloitte that have said that the cost of overall well-being to UK businesses is now at £57 billion per annum.
Gosh.
Just before the pandemic, it was at 45 billion, which was a lot then. But we should be looking at ways to reduce that and not having those costs go up. And then another statistic is that apparently absenteeism has gone down. But again, I think if you look beyond that, so when I speak to people, especially remote workers, then I mean, there was somebody I spoke to last year, and he had COVID, and he had it quite badly, but he carried on working throughout because he was able to just log onto his laptop and attend Zoom meetings, etc. But he was really poorly. Now, if he was working in the office, he wouldn't have gone into the office. So then that would have added to the absenteeism figures across the whole range. But I said to him, how productive and present do you actually think you were when you carried on working, when you were that unwell? And he said, well, I wasn't. And he was actually facing a disciplinary because he'd made a mistake. because he just couldn't function properly. And so, they actually say the cost of presenteeism are 4 times higher than absenteeism. And I'm not surprised to hear that. So I think it's always looking just a little bit beyond it. Well, maybe we should be, or managers, for example, should be encouraging people to not turn up for work, whether they work at home or not, if they're really not fit to do so.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the debate around presenteeism at the moment is interesting for those that maybe this term's new for. It's this principle of people effectively turning up. They're not absentees, as Shona said, but they are not. They're sort of mentally checked out. It's the sort of idea behind quiet quitting on a larger scale. Now, the problem here is we've come pretty good at sort of expecting and accepting absenteeism. We normally have some sort of idea of, if this person's off, this is what we'll do. Either we'll get someone temporary in, or we'll move someone from another department to fix it, or from their team, or or we'll just put an out of office on so that they get a bit of time if they're going to be back in the following day. This is all sort of like predictable and kind of low risk strategy. But I think it's quite interesting when you consider presenteeism that you haven't noticed this person away. You can't put on an out of office reply that says, "Oh, I'm kind of mentally checked out today. Sorry about that. I'll come back to you tomorrow." And so, especially if this happens over a long period of time, what is the damage of an innocent mistake? Just a moment of effectively negligence from being sort of checked out, whether it's because of stress or because of quiet quitting, or whatever it is that's caused it. That can actually not just have a kind of effect where you don't achieve what you're trying to achieve on a given day. Productivity decreases. Actually, you can do a mass amount of damage that then can have huge knock-on effects within the business. And I think this debate alone is quite powerful about presenteeism. What do you think?
I mean, it happened to me. When I was working in the corporate world as a lawyer, and I'd just come towards the end of working just over 80 hours for this week, and I had a holiday booked, and I thought I need to get all this done before I go away. And I was working on this one particular case, and I'd been working on it for about 9 months. And we were at the point where we'd exchanged all the documents with the other side, and then offers started to come in. It was an employment law case, and I had this client who he wouldn't answer his phone from our work numbers because it came up with withheld. So he'd say, "Just send me an email and I'll call you straight back." And I was rushing sending this email, and I missed a digit out the email address, and it went to the wrong person. And although there was nothing confidential attached to that particular email, I got suspended on full pay, literally frog marched out the building. And they got somebody external in to investigate my case. They had to tell my client. They had to take the file off me and give it to somebody else. I also got reported to my professional body, which was so stressful. The panic attacks were unreal.
It's humiliating, right? Like for an innocent mistake.
I just thought, God, I mean, I knew they wouldn't find anything on my file. There was nothing that I'd done wrong. But, from something so small, they did then take, make an example out of me and gave me a final written warning. And I remember my line manager saying to me, "You need to remember in this world that we're not human, we're robots, and we cannot make mistakes." And that extra pressure on me to basically be perfect, which nobody is, made me even more unwell. And and like I said earlier on, I would just stare at a document for God knows how long and wouldn't be able to tell you what it said. So if you look at that in the context of presenteeism, the cost of having to get somebody in to investigate the file, pay me while I'm off, have somebody else take over the casework while I was there and get up to speed with the case again as well, because they had to take it over. That all adds up and is quite expensive when you think about it.
Absolutely, and yet these are the kind of I think my experience of a lot of business leaders, particularly those who have kind of been around the block, they see this either as it won't happen to me because it never does, or two, that it's kind of just cost of business. Oh, retention. Well, people leave, don't you? So you just got to replace them, and this kind of attitude just brings in these kind of inefficiencies over and over and over again. They're productivity inefficiencies. They're also massive cost centres that are just, well, it's just the cost of business, just what we do. And I think there's got to be surely there's got to be a better way. I mean, people out there are achieving a better solution. So the fact that that's happening, can't we do that? So moving on to the sort of second part of this now, talking there, about the effect of well-being, and how even a little bit of sort of inattentiveness caused by burnout, stress, financial worries, etc., the effect that they can have on the working day. So let's do, imagine. For a minute, we're 5 years down the line, and we've kind of, we've fixed this. We've accepted that we're not robots, we're human, that have all of the irritating things about being human and not being the robot, but actually also the great things about being human. The thinking outside the box, the way that we can do things that even ChatGPT can't do. So. Let's say we fix this. We've got through this kind of well-being issue. We've got companies that understand and put the right thing in place. What kind of world would we find? What would we expect if that were the case?
I think we find a world where there's not as much staff turnover and problems with the recruitment. I don't think we're going to see as much of that. At the end of the day, if you create a culture that has a happy and engaged workforce, then that increases productivity, and a positive company culture is generally more cost effective as well. So I think we'll be in a position where we'll have more well-being coaches maybe in a workplace, where people feel like they're being listened to, they have a safe space. And then when I've been doing this for companies, the first question I ask the people who book in is, has anyone asked you what you want? And then just report this back. So when I do my reports to the companies I work with, they are anonymous, but I do say general things that I've been working with people on, and then suggestions for how to make things different. So just simple things like asking your staff what they want. Asking for feedback then gives you deeper insights into any issues and helps with improvements. As a result, employees feel engaged and listened to. And if you make your employees feel valued, then from what I find in particular when I speak to people, is the lack of recognition is one of the biggest reasons why people are leaving jobs. Not so much down to pay and benefits. Yes, that is a factor, but it's that lack of recognition. And I think that, if we're down the line 5 years' time, then there will hopefully be, better policies. Well-being will be incorporated into policies. People will have more autonomy over their day. It won't be just down to, you have to do this between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. It will be hopefully giving people a lot more control and promoting that healthy balance of life, which also, in my experience, gives people motivation. It makes you want to spend more time at work. And if you enjoy it and you've got that autonomy over your day. And that will reduce significantly the cost of burnout as well, which, as we all know, impacts performance. And that knock-on effect which comes with that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the good news here is that we are starting to see companies waking up to this. One of our future guests, in fact, has a sort of motto within his company and staff: feedback is a gift. I think he says this kind of multiple times a day to everyone. Feedback is a gift, and yet we seem so scared of this feedback. But if we can create a healthy feedback sort of schedule that gives people a voice, that alone is sort of respect and recognition. It's turning around saying, you're a person. What have you got to say? The experiments that are kind of happening in this area, you've got the classic people like Netflix and their famous culture document, but moving through into more modern companies, from tiny companies all the way up to vast companies that are really kind of focusing on this well-being and finding that productivity's gone up, retention's gone up, absenteeism's gone down, all of the kind of good effects that then move forward with that. I always ask people, I challenge them, and this probably won't be too difficult for you given the story that you mentioned, but for anyone listening as well, I challenge people, think of a job that you hated on a day that you really didn't want to be there. And if you can't think of a particular day, you can probably think of lots of them. And just imagine for a moment that you're back there on that day, and think about how much effort you put into that day. How productive you were, how collaborative you were, how innovative, whether you cared ultimately. And now put that to one side and juxtapose it with a position or a job that you love on a day that you thought, what, I was good today. The kind of day when you go home, you pat yourself on the back, so I'm going to order myself a takeaway as a treat, or whatever it is that you do. And think of how much work you did on that day, and how productive and innovative and collaborative you were, and how much you cared. And that difference ultimately is the difference between an engaged and a disengaged employee. But that's in one person. Yeah. And so just imagine if you could take everyone in your company. Now, we're never going to achieve that, that amazing day every day, because we're human and we can't do that. We're not robots. But if we can push people towards that ideal, imagine what we can achieve if everyone goes to work. I'm going to fight hard to fix the issues that I've got in front of me today. I'm going to make things better. I'm going to leave this job, this position, this day, this office, whatever it is, I'm going to leave it better than when I got here. That attitude just compounds into something incredible. And I think it's
about mindset, isn't it? A lot of the time. And sometimes it's easier said than done, because when you're already, I did love my job as a lawyer. I loved it for a long time. I really did. And then, partly down to, it was maybe, part of it was down to the company where I worked, where you get this badge of honour if you worked more hours. So the people who did stay late at night, every night, and then give up their weekends, we'd have these quarterly award ceremonies, and people would be, given nice prizes. I got given a magnum of champagne one year and an award for Employee of the Quarter, which I thought was great. But actually, that was only because I was working ridiculous hours and giving up my time. And, I will never get that time back with my daughter. And, she's grown up so quickly. She's 14 and a half now. But for a few years, I always wanted to be that mum who was at the school gate at least once a week. And I wasn't. And it's not that I regret anything. Life's too short to regret. But it's like, what can you change? And, even with men who work long hours as well, I was reading a book once, and it made me feel quite emotional just reading it, because this guy, he was a leader of a company, and he wanted to also be there for his kids. And one of his children turned around one day and said, "But Daddy, even when you are with us, you're not with us, because you're always on your phone or you're checking your emails." And it took that for him to start switching things off and actually being more present for his family. And it is so true. And life just can go by. And if you don't recognize the signs, or anyone says to you to slow down a little bit, you just carry on. And the more and more overtime you work, the more hours you work, the less the company are going to think, oh, well, we need to get some more staff in, because the staff are working these extra hours. So something needs to change, and sometimes it is the culture, but also down to the person having those boundaries and saying no.
Absolutely. And I think, the danger with these kind of debates and arguments is that, business leaders, people in sort of management or leadership positions say, well, if you want to go and, do that's fine. Just don't do it here. I want the people who are, willing to put in the hours, because they know what's good for them, and they'll get more out of it if they care about their career, etc. And I just think it's the difference, in the world that we're in now, with the amount of tools that are available on the internet and the amount of, Canva, for example, most people have heard of Canva as a very easy way to create sort of graphics or templates, etc., etc. In fact, I created the podcast cover on it. Once upon a time, to do that, you needed someone really highly trained on Photoshop. And don't get me wrong, those people are still going to do it better now. And the people who can do that are amazing. But if you have the ability to go and do that, find those things, find the next thing, etc., and keep searching, then productivity becomes an almost kind of infinitely scalable metric, or at least can be thought of given the current position. So if you can have people, if you're expecting people to work, I don't know, a 12-hour day, and they do a certain amount of work, but you instead look after them and they do an 8-hour day, and because of increased productivity, do twice as much work, then, or maybe they even go down to 6 hours, and now because they're being more innovative and collaborative and thinking, because they're not they managed to get out of their own brain for at least a movement snack, then they're sort of 3 times as productive. Ultimately, it's the productivity that matters, right? It's the productivity and the innovation. We're companies. We're trying to achieve as much as we can given the resources that we've got. It's the sort of very basis of anything, and yet we're not focusing on how productive our people are, and yet people are expensive. On most financial papers, it's like top line stuff.
Expensive part, and I will stand firm by saying any organisation needs to put their people first, because
absolutely,
without good people, you don't have a good business. So this is why I do think it should be taken seriously, and there is evidence. Again, I quote Deloitte, but they've done a lot of research on this, as well as I'm sure you have as well. But the return of investment, if you invest in a good well-being policy, or however you do it within the workplace, brings you a return of investment of £5 on every £1 spent. And there are numerous studies to show similar figures as well. So it's getting people to see that bigger picture. Well, why do we need this? And I've worked with companies who've said, well, in this particular year, we're gonna focus on well-being, and then it gets to the end of the year, and there's been some brilliant results, and then the following year they're like, well, we're now going to invest in tech and products and not well-being anymore. And I worked for one company, and I won't say any names, but within less than a month of me not being there anymore to help with their people development, 37 people left. And we know from your employee engagement tool how much employee turnover costs, and if they just saw that, and actually I worked it out for this particular company, that it was costing them £11.3 million a year in staff turnover based on those figures. So it should speak for itself, really.
It's amazing. Yeah, we often sit in there and think, people are sat in board meetings, and I've been privy to some of those board meetings in my time, and they sat there going, how can we increase revenue in this area? What new opportunity? What if we approach this market? How could achieve this, etc., etc. And okay, yeah, at some point you need your top line to increase if you want to grow as a company. But actually, if you want your bottom line to increase, which is generally speaking what the shareholders are after anyway, then removing all the costs along the way is a pretty good way of making that happen. And yet we don't sit there and think, how can I get 20% more out of my staff? Because I suppose the sort of old school feeling of it is, oh, well, I need a bigger stick and I need to hit them harder, and I'm a good person, so I'm not going to do that. But actually, there's so much evidence, as you say. Deloitte have done some great stuff. Gallup have done some great studies in this area as well, about actually, if you take a positive attitude to like caring more, ultimately, it's what it comes down to, right? Caring more. If you do that, then the effects on costs and productivity and bottom line. Like it's well documented that these companies, grow more, they invest more in themselves, and it all compounds. It's not just, oh, this year we did better because less people left. It's, oh, well, now next year we'll do better because we've still got all of that experience, and we, didn't have to spend a load of time hiring them, so we spent time doing this instead, and it just compounds and compounds. So yes.
And this goes back, I think, to asking your staff what they want, and not just assuming that, oh, this is going to change everything. I recently had a conversation with one company director, and they were introducing an unlimited leave policy into their workforce because they said, oh, this is going to be great for talent acquisition. Well, I worked with another big company for over a year who had had the same policy, unlimited leave, and it looks great on paper, but when it actually comes to it, so many people are not taking any leave. One, because they're so busy, or they can't possibly take any time off because there's no one to cover their work when they're off. And then even if they do go off, they're not switching off when they're on their holiday, and then they're coming back to piles and piles of work. Well, there are very easy ways to manage that, and it really starts with management. If you've got a manager who's encouraging your people in the teams to take time off, if you're getting to the end of the first quarter and no one's booked any leave or even had a day off, maybe sort of suggesting maybe you want to think about having a day off or a week off at some point, and then having a system in place. So there's like a buddy system, so that when somebody is away, then somebody else there'll be a handover of work. But again, if the employee manages that well themselves, and when I used to be a lawyer, even going back many years, I used to put like a little footnote on my letters or on my emails saying I'll be away from the office between this day and this date. In an emergency, please refer to, and I'd give a colleague's name, and then I'd always do like a little handover note as to where I was on that case, so that if anyone picked it up in my absence, they'd know, well, this is what's going on, this is what we're up to. And I would work a little bit harder before I'd go away. So if I knew that there was like a court case, for example, coming up a week after I came back from my holiday, then I would make sure I prepared all the statements, done everything before I'd gone away. So it's about being organised and prioritising as well. And it might seem obvious to a lot of people, but this is why we need good managers as well, to be able to look into that and provide that encouragement and support.
Absolutely. Look, it's been brilliant to have you on, Shona, and your depth of knowledge and experience in this area, and also just how passionate you are. It's clear, seeing you, hearing you, just how much you care, and I think that's a really crucial lesson, for a lot of people. If you do truly care, it's really quite amazing what we can achieve. It's been such a pleasure to have you here, Shona. I'm so grateful.
Thank you. I'm really honoured. Thanks, Fraser.